Hi Bean, welcome back to my channel where you sit and listen to me rant about whatever the hell I feel like while you, I don't know, clean your room or something. I don't know. If you couldn't already tell by the title of today's video, then we're going to be talking about composting. Mostly we're going to be talking about how to start your own compost at home. But before we get into that, make sure you hit the subscribe button so that you can continue to learn about composting. And if you like today's video, don't forget to like it, okay? Thank you. Love you. So let's start off with the question, what is compost? According to Google, compost is decayed organic material used as a plant fertilizer. Now, I like this definition, but I also don't like it because composting doesn't have to just be used for plant fertilizer. Compost is also an important component of natural soil. You probably have walked on compost and not even realized it. If you've ever been in the forest and you've smelled that earthly, I don't know how to describe it, like the smell of leaves in the fall on the forest floor, that is probably compost. Now, compost doesn't necessarily involve human interaction, hence why, it happens in the forest floor and you smell it. It doesn't necessarily mean that you need to be involved in the process. However, if we exist on this planet and we continue to eat food, then we kind of need to be composting. But let me backtrack to how compost got started. So, compost has been around forever, obviously. Like I said, it doesn't necessarily require human intervention. So, people have been doing composting, whether or not they realize it, for probably since the beginning of humanity. Native Americans in America used to compost by digging holes in the ground and putting their compost in the ground and then putting soil back on top of it, and it's called sheet composting. I thought that was really fascinating. Editing TT here. I realized when I was watching this video back that I forgot to mention that we are still benefiting from the Native Americans doing this practice in the soil. We are still seeing benefits from it today. However, with the Industrial Revolution and colonization, Americans seem to have lost their way when it comes to composting. This is tragic and it's contributing to a lot of problems in the environment, which I won't go over in this video, but I do plan on making a video about it. So if you hit the subscribe button, I'm sorry to do this again, but if you hit the subscribe button, maybe you'll get notified about that video when it comes out if you're interested. But for now, I just want to say that yes, composting is an important facet of the environment. It is a natural process and it helps keep nutrients in the soil. So it's kind of important. So what do you need to get started with composting? Well, you'll need greens, you'll need browns, you'll need a spot to put them in with airflow and moisture. There are some other things that are preferable for starting out your compost bin. For example, it's best if you've got some soil in there. It helps kind of establish where the bacteria can stay, and it's kind of just like a starter for all that bacteria and fungi and stuff. It gives them a home. And starting biome is really preferable, as well as like temperate environments. So the warmer the better. Now stay away from those comments because I know what you're about to ask. What are greens? What are browns? Great question. Glad you asked. So greens are going to be your organic materials, such as your leftover kitchen scraps or weeds. Weeds with an S. I see you back there. Okay. I'm not talking about that. But if you want to put it in your compost, I guess you can. Other examples might include coffee grounds, tea leaves, houseplant leaves, seaweed, if you've got it, grass clippings, if you've got grass clippings. But if you're going to use grass clippings, go to the risks part of this video because there are some risks associated with putting grass clippings in your compost. I will talk about that later. And what are browns? Browns are going to be carbon heavy material such as cardboard or newspaper or paper or even your paper towels. If you've got paper towels or you use paper towels, you can put that in there. Just make sure you're not using it with chemicals before you put it in your compost. That's not good for your compost. Dead leaves are a good example, even dried grass clippings. But once again, risks part of the video because there are some risks associated with using grass clippings in the compost. You can do sawdust. You could put in hay. You could put in straw. You can put in things like your hair, which is crazy and it takes longer to break down. But if you're really willing to try it, go ahead. If you've got pets that you brush every now and again, we do. using their hair in the compost is totally fine. Just like I said, it does take a little bit longer to break down. You can also put things like wood and wood chips in the compost. However, those also take a long time to break down. So just kind of be wary of that stuff when you're putting it in the compost. When it comes to compost, there's kind of like one general rule, and that's if it comes from a plant, then it can go in the compost. Organic material is always welcome in the compost. That being said, there are some exceptions on what you should put into the compost when it comes to plants, such as diseased plants, specifically plants diseased with bacterial or viral infections, because some of those bacterial and viral infections can live in the soil for years and years and years. So, to prevent the spread of those types of diseases, kind of keep them out of the compost. Other than that, if you've got a plant that's been infected with pests, a lot of places will tell you not to put that in the compost. However, I don't see any problem with it. If anything, they're going to help the composting process, and they'll continue to help the composting process so long as you keep that separated and you remember to age your compost after it's done. Other things that really shouldn't go in the compost, anything that's been in contact with chemicals, anything that's got plastic in it or on it, animal byproducts. This one can be kind of iffy because there are some situations which call for animal byproducts. For example, when you're first starting your compost out, it is advised to put chicken poop in it. You can go to your local like gardening or department store, like you can go to your like local Fleet Farm or Menards right now and get a bag of chicken poo. I'm not kidding. Yes, you can. It'll be dried. Obviously, it's not fresh from the source, but you can go to your local department store and pick that up like right now. And this is going to help with some of the bacteria that's necessary for processing a lot of food, because chickens, they will eat just about anything, and then their digestive tracts kind of have the bacteria in it that's necessary for processing compost. Another thing that is typically okay for compost but is an animal product is pee. For most animals is typically fine. If you're sitting there wondering right now, can I pee in my compost? The answer is yes, you can. And honestly, depending on who you ask, some people even recommend it. I've tried it personally and I've seen the difference it can make, and I do recommend it. If you are really, really adamant about wanting to try it and you are curious about it, do it. Other things that I would be wary of putting in the compost are things like eggshells. This is an animal byproduct, but that's not the reason why it shouldn't go in. It just really takes a long time. My exception to this is if you've got a mortar and pestle like I do, you can grind that up and put it in your compost, and then it kind of just naturally breaks down at the speed with everything else, or it adds some grit to the soil, which isn't necessarily a bad thing either. Structure is always good. When you're first starting your compost bin, you're looking for a ratio of about 40% greens to about 60% browns. One of the things that you're going to be looking for when it comes to composting is moisture levels in the compost. Greens are going to add moisture, browns are going to take moisture away. How do you know if you've got too many of one thing or the other? If you've got too much browns in your compost, it's going to start to slow down. And this is because the moisture content obviously goes down, as well as the microorganisms and the bacteria and the fungi that are all living in the compost will no longer have a significant source of organic matter to eat, thus slowing down the composting process. Now, how do you know if you've got too much greens in there? I promise you'll know. It'll start to smell. A healthy compost doesn't really smell all that much. It smells kind of earthy, maybe a little bit moist. Sometimes I feel like it smells like maybe like a wet sock, if you understand what I mean by that. But for the most part, it doesn't really stink, and it shouldn't stink. And if it does stink, add more browns to it, and it should stop stinking. So how do you maintain the compost? Maintenance when it comes to compost should be relatively easy. More than anything, check the moisture content of the compost, as well as maybe mix it around every now and again. Your goal with mixing it is to make sure that the completed stuff is on top of the non-completed stuff, because you're exposing all that bacteria and fungus to the non-complete stuff. Otherwise, the composting doesn't really need a whole lot of maintenance. You obviously should keep adding stuff if you see it going down, and there are ways to retrieve that compost depending on your system. which I'll talk about in a different video because there's so many different ways to do composting systems. But briefly, let's talk about what kind of containers to put your compost in, because this is a how to compost video. So composting containers can look like anything you want them to. Right now I have a tumbler outside, but I live in the Midwest, and right now it is negative. Oh, it's 21 degrees out. That's surprising. Right now it's 21 degrees out. So it is below freezing, and thus my outside compost isn't really super active, and it's because a lot of the microorganisms in there are frozen. I do have two indoor composts as of right now, and they're both in the Tidy Cats litter bins that you get from the store if you buy those like big boxes of litter. Because we have 5 cats, so I use those and then I drill some holes in them, lots of holes, and then I use those for composting. So you can do it in just about anything you want. The most important thing when it comes to composting bins is that it's got airflow. It needs to have airflow. Not having airflow is the equivalent of throwing it in a garbage bag and sending it to the landfill. You're not doing anything differently if you don't put air in there. The one factor that is different between a compost and landfill rot is oxygen, and it needs that oxygen. So make sure it's got good, proper airflow, okay? Now let's talk about temperatures. So temperatures are really important to the composting process because the more heat there is, the faster the chemical reaction. The colder it is outside, like I said earlier, it's below freezing here right now, the slower the composting process. This doesn't mean that my outdoor compost is not doing anything at all. It is not completely frozen like in time and not doing anything. Of course, there is still biological activity in there. However, it is slowed to negligible progress, is how I'll put that, because of the temperature out there. And not only do composts require good temperatures, they will also create heat in the processing of organic material. Depending on how you set up your compost, how big it is, and what you put in there, some composts are capable of lighting themselves on fire. I'm not kidding. There have been many instances of this, and typically how that happens is through grass clippings, hence why I said to skip to the warnings part of this video for the grass clippings, because that's important to know. Which brings me to the warnings part of this video. So for the most part, composting is relatively safe. There are definitely way more dangerous activities you could engage in. However, there have been some instances of, like I mentioned a little bit ago, of composting bins lighting on fire. And this really does have to do with your construction of the compost bin. If you've got a very heavy, tight, lots of little bits of organic material, then the chances of it lighting on fire go up. Versus if you're putting in like whole produce or just vegetable clippings and some cardboard or whatever, the chances that it's going to light on fire are relatively slim. It is specifically grass clippings that tend to be really dangerous because they have a lot of small organic pieces that can trap heat and build and build and build until it lights on fire. Another possible danger that comes with composting is there have been instances where certain people have been composting and they have died from the fungus that was in their compost. However, this fungus lives in the soil that you walk on every day, and if you are susceptible to that type of fungus, there's not a whole lot you can do to avoid it from happening. So at the same time, it's just something to be wary of. It's good to know this before you dive in head first. Now, another question that my boyfriend said I should include in the video is how to speed it up or slow it down. As far as speeding it up goes, like I said, temperature is really, really quintessential when it comes to a speedy process, as well as a starting biome. And what I mean by a starting biome is an established compost that has already been going and is successful and continuous. Like my outdoor compost, I've had it for several years. It is well established. It processes food like when it's warm out. Adding a starting biome is really quintessential for that. Making sure you've got the right amount of greens to browns is really important. If you're really, really keen on making sure it goes super fast, consider adding black soldier fly larvae. This is for probably outdoor compost only. I don't really recommend having flying bugs in your place. It's not a whole lot of fun, but if you're into that, who am I to stop you? Black soldier flies are a very beneficial creature. Their main goal in life is to contribute to composting. They break down organic material and they poop out compost. but those black soldier flies don't do anything to your vegetable garden. They're actually just super beneficial. So if you see them, they kind of look like wasps. They're a little scary looking, but they are your friends. They are your friends. Please don't kill them. Before I move on how to slow it down, I do want to talk real quick about bugs in your compost. I'm on the composting Reddit all the time, and every like couple of weeks there's somebody who posts in there saying there's bugs in my compost. What do I do about it? If there are bugs in your compost, that is a good thing. Keep those bugs there. They are going to help process that organic material and give you better compost. We like bugs when it comes to composting. Okay? All right. Thank you. This has been my TED Talk. As far as slowing it down goes, putting it in a colder area or having it be colder will slow it down. Like I was talking about earlier, how my outdoor compost is not, keeping up with the Jones. Another way to do it is to completely deprive it of water or oversaturate it with water to the point where it's swampy and soppy. And if you're doing that on accident, please add more browns. If you just add more browns, it'll be fine. But underwatering is a way to slow down your compost. Another thing I wrote down is add more browns. So just adding browns in general will help slow down your compost, especially if you've got your ratios right and then you add more browns in, it will slow down your compost. Adding complex browns as well will also slow down your compost. And what I mean by complex browns is like sticks or wood or eggshells, right? Anything that will take a long time to break down, like hair, clothing, it will slow down the composting process. Now let's talk about the uses of compost. Compost can be used in a bunch of different ways. I like to use it for my plants indoors and my vegetable garden. Other ways you can use compost, you can just throw it onto the ground outside if you like. You can give it to your local farmers. They could use that stuff. They use chemical fertilizers right now, and chemical fertilizers are bad for the environment, and they're bad for the food. So giving it to your farmers is also a good idea. Another thing you can do is you can use it to build your own soil at home. So if you have wondered how soil is made, part of that is organic material like compost. It's really good for doing that as well, and I've done that a couple times before. Now, the last thing I wanted to include in this video was kind of some frequently asked questions that I receive when I talk to people in my life about composting. I've kind of already mixed those in there in this video. For example, like I get, does it ever smell? And it shouldn't, right? But a couple questions that I did not go over yet. Does it ever gross you out? And the answer to that is, for the most part, no. Rotting material usually does, like rotted grapes or rotted, I don't know, rotted fruit of any kind when it's all mushy and stuff. Ugh, hate it. For the most part, it doesn't really gross me out because to me, it's beautiful and it's an amazing feature of nature, and it's something that doesn't involve me, even though I get to observe it. I get the privilege and the honor to observe Mother Nature in my own tiny little way. So another question I get asked is how did you get started with composting? To be honest, I don't really remember. It's a couple of years ago, and being neurodivergent, which is what this channel is named, is neurodivergent struggling. I tend to get curious about certain things and then kind of deep dive on it. So I'm assuming it was probably one of those situations where I heard about it on the internet when I was doing gardening, and I was like, "What's that?" So I looked into it and learned a shit ton about it, and now I've done it myself for years. So anything you had to learn the hard way, or any tips that I could share? My only thing that I have to share, other than the bugs thing, which I already kind of went over, my biggest tip is don't overstuff your compost. Okay, it's not dangerous unless you're using grass clippings. Don't do that. But if you're just using like your regular old kitchen stuff, it's not that it'll start on fire or that anything like that. It's that you won't be able to mix it as well. And when you're not able to mix it as well, it won't go as fast. Another piece of advice I have is don't waste your time cutting up your old produce. If you've got produce in the back of your fridge, like don't waste your time cutting up something that you barely want to touch anyway. That's not a sustainable way to do things. And it's also not that great for the compost either. Some people swear that it makes the composting process go faster, but I've also seen conflicting arguments that breaking it down into tinier pieces takes longer to process because there's less pockets for air, so the microorganisms have to like stay on the outside. In my experience, leaving your produce whole when you put it in there, so long as it's not like, vegetable peels or whatever, because obviously you can't do that, but leaving your produce as whole as possible when putting it into your compost is the best way to go about putting it into your compost. Other than that, composting is a natural process. Like I said, it doesn't usually involve humans. In nature, composting happens when the trees fall to the forest floor, or when a plant dies off, or when produce falls to the ground. If you've ever been through an apple orchard, you've seen all the apples that litter the ground and go back into the soil eventually. So composting isn't a process that necessarily involves humans. However, our produce that we overconsume and send off to landfills, or even our vegetable scraps or what have you, if you're really good at managing your produce, all that stuff is compost material, and it should be used in compost, which I will explain in a different video. In conclusion, I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, don't forget to hit the like button. And if you didn't, then I don't know how you got here, but that's neither here nor there. Like I said, I will kind of talk about the benefits of composting, because there are lots of benefits. I'll talk about the environmental benefits of composting. If it's up, it's right here. And then I'll talk about the mental benefits of composting. And if that's up, it's right here. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them down in the comments below. I read every comment because I'm just a small bean. And remember to drink your water. Remember that meditation is the key to a happy and balanced life. And don't forget that you are loved and welcomed here. All right. Thank you. Have a good one.